Welcome to the Samson Strength Coach Collective. Today's episode will be slightly different. There's one thing I want to talk about first before we get into what today's episode is going to look like. Uh, Obviously, Hurricane Helene came through Boone, North Carolina. First of all, the biggest thing I want to say is I can't even thank everybody individually who reached out. So many people reached out, from previous guests to listeners to the Samson staff themselves. So it is greatly appreciated. I hope you understand that. My fiance and myself are okay. We're totally fine. We got very, very fortunate. It was, it's hard to put into words what this did to Western North Carolina and obviously far eastern Tennessee and Virginia. It was a pretty devastating storm. So, if you are interested in donating, if you are looking to help out, I think that donating would be one of the best things to look at because some people lost everything. Some people lost their lives. I've talked and spoken with multiple people who've lost their homes. Some people won't get their power back until mid-November. So it was certainly a devastating storm, and it was a perspective giver as well too. Like for those basketball strength coaches, we're in that time frame where we're starting official practices, and being able to come back and go to practice and pretend like everything was totally normal outside of the world of basketball was a gift, honestly. And so it's easy to, take each day for granted. And that at the end of the day is not the best way to live, right? Because anything can be taken from you at any moment. So, we are incredibly fortunate. I don't want to start this on a somber note, but I do just want to, let the people know who have checked in that everything's totally fine. We are good. But a lot of people around here do need some help. So if you are interested in donating, I certainly would recommend it. But at the end of the day, my fiance and myself and the rest of most of our universities was pretty fortunate. So I just wanted to update on that. Now, today's episode will be myself again, my 2 times per year at this point, solo podcast. And what I wanted to talk about today was self-determination theory, something that we've talked about on the podcast previously. I've mentioned it a ton. I've talked about it with previous guests, and other guests have mentioned it before too. But I really wanted to break it down and explain exactly what it is, how I use it, and how it's helped me in coaching. So I'm excited to dive into it. As always, thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoy. What's going on, Samson Strength Coach Collective listeners? As I mentioned in the intro, today's episode is going to be a little bit different. We're going to talk about self-determination theory, which is something that has greatly influenced my coaching and has allowed me to develop really good relationships with the athletes I work with. Now, one thing I want to preface this with is I did get my master's degree in sports psych and motor behavior at the University of Tennessee. However, I am not a certified mental performance consultant. So I do not practice with athletes. I do not, have hold sessions. Legally, I'm not allowed to as well because I'm not certified. So I just want to make that very clear from the start. Is I am not a CMPC, unlike somebody like Matt Moore, who was a previous guest on here, who is a active CMPC. So understand, if you are looking in the sports psych world, the people you want to really reach out to for any individual coaching or people who you want to learn further from, it would be best from a CMPC. But the one thing I did take from my time was self-determination theory and how to use it. It was something we focused on highly within the program. And so I think it's valuable to speak about because it has direct applications to coaching. It has direct applications to making your coaching more successful as a whole. Just to start, this is a theory created by Ryan and DC at the University of Rochester. It was a motivational theory that is not essentially based around sport, but it has been applied to sport and it can be very successful. I think the original studies were like, trying to convince patients to lower their cholesterol and how to motivate those patients to do those. So this is not a theory based in sport like most theories, but at the end of the day, it does help coaches. And so it was invented by Ryan and DC, and the official definition from their website is self-determination theory articulates a meta-theory from framing motivational studies, a formal theory that defines intrinsic and varied extrinsic sources of motivation, and a description of the respective roles of intrinsic and types of extrinsic motivation in cognitive and social development and individual differences, which is a mouthful, okay? And so as a strength coach, how would I myself define this? It's basically, how do you improve the quality of motivation for your athletes? And, one important factor to understand, one thing that needs to be addressed immediately is that motivation is not a quantity. It's not how much motivation you have. It's a quality, right? It's a sliding scale of motivation, which we'll dive into deeply in the next coming minutes. But at the end of the day, you can't increase the amount of motivation an athlete has. It's just not possible to do, but you can improve the quality of motivation that they have. And it can be broken down really into a bunch of different sects, which is pretty interesting. And in this trying to explain this theory, I have examples for each of these, right? And then I've got kind of a silly example of me eating vegetables towards the end of this. But at the end of the day, why does it matter? Why should you listen to me talk about self-determination theory? Well, as strength coaches, one of the biggest things is the relationships that we develop with our athletes. And if we can get athletes to trust in us, then we're going to be more successful as coaches at the end of the day. When you hear older coaches speak, so guys who've been very successful in their field, like Craig Fitzgerald, Darby Rich, Dan Worth. These are all people who were my personal mentors who have done this for a long time. I remember, and we've mentioned it many times on the podcast previously, like people care about programming a lot when they first start out as strength coaches. Like it's always about the program. What's my program going to look like? How's it going to be the best? And the programming absolutely is a certain specific aspect to it. It does drive success for strength and conditioning programs. But the reason I bring these mentors up is because the main thing that they ever talked to me about was relationship development with our athletes. It was always about how do you get athletes to buy in? How do you show the athletes that you care about them? And so naturally, you see coaches who are good at doing this. There's coaches who are able to get their athletes involved with the weight room more, are able to get them to buy in on sleep and nutrition more. And the reason self-determination theory is so interesting to me and why I think it can be so helpful to other coaches is because it's not just a natural talent thing that these people have, maybe for some of them, but at the end of the day, they're usually using principles of self-determination theory, whether they know it or not. And that's what's helping them improve the relationship with their athletes and helping the athletes to buy in as much as possible. I remember I was sitting in class one day and I asked the question to myself, like, at the end of the day, isn't this just what good coaches do already? And obviously, I asked more of a theoretical person, so they like to stick with a theory. And she said, "No, well, it's not necessarily how it goes." So I didn't ask the question in the best way possible. But in my mind, that was the moment it clicked to me: like, good coaches do certain things that help athletes buy in. And what can you do as a coach to help flex that buy-in muscle, to help develop better relationships with your athletes? So what will help you the most as a coach? And self-determination theory is basically just a framework that lays out exactly what to do. And so I've talked about it many times in the podcast in the past. I view strength and conditioning as an art and a science, and it's a Venn diagram of both. And what can you meet in the middle, right? And so the programming aspect, we can read more textbooks, right? We can spend more time looking at what X program does and what this specific school is doing with their athletes and what possible data they can collect and report and how that helps drive it, right? That's all on the science side. And sorry if this is the elementary breakdown for you guys, but just to explain my thought process in this, like we have the art side as well too, and there's just not necessarily as much of a specific research or specific data that you can achieve, right? Like we've all read Simon Sinek, we've all read, all these great authors who can help us with leadership and help you be better as a culture driver within the weight room, right? But at the end of the day, like it's not specific data set points or specific, these are your direct outcomes. And self-determination theory doesn't necessarily provide that, but it does provide a little bit more of a concrete step-by-step analysis of relationships with athletes and what to do and analysis of their motivation levels. So at the end of the day, self-determination theory to me is how do you improve the quality of motivation for an athlete? It, it really has changed my career. It's changed the relationships I develop with our athletes, and I feel like it's provided more success within the art side. So I hope you guys are interested in hearing about it. I hope you guys buy in on it. And, coaches way better than me have used this as well, too. You hear about Ali Kirshner over at Stanford. I'm pretty sure it was the year on their championship run when they won the NCAA championship with women's basketball at Stanford. It was a COVID year, and now I hope I'm not, being an idiot and getting this incorrect. But Allie essentially did not have nearly as much time because of the restrictions in California to train her athletes. And so when they came in I think it was around September, October, when they first came back, Allie was able to use self-determination theory by exploiting autonomy, right? And using the autonomy piece, which we'll get into later with the theory. And so she gave the athletes the choice of, if you want to squat today, well, you can do front squats, single leg squats, back squats, right? That autonomy allowed the athletes to buy in more. And now you can't directly point to this and say this is why they won the national championship. If strength coaches could do that, then we'd be getting head coaches' salaries. And that's obviously not the case. So But at the end of the day, like, why would you not want to do something that can help you get 1% better? And why would you not want to do something that can help you improve? And so Ali Kersher, a fantastic coach who uses it. Matt Aldred over at Michigan was another fantastic coach, is another fantastic coach who uses autonomy a ton with it, with his athletes. And, you've always heard about it. Like, providing choice to the athletes gets them more bought in, but why? And self-determination theory is what's used to explain that. So trust the other coaches, trust the better coaches than me on why it's important. But, the first thing we're going to touch on is the sliding scale of motivation itself. So when we talk about motivation, again, it's a quality, not a quantity. And there's essentially a sliding scale. And if you look up sliding scale of motivation, you'll see a specific graphic that shows everything I'm about to mention. But on the left side, you have A motivated, which means you are just completely not motivated whatsoever. You're probably not showing up. You're probably not giving any effort whatsoever on what you're trying to do. You hate the activity that you're doing. Okay. And so for each of these motivation examples, I'm going to give you the example of a strength coach with lifting, right? Because I'm sure all strength coaches can identify with the fact that sometimes you don't really love lifting. Sometimes it's not the most fun part of your day. And so what's your motivation level if that's the case? And those are the examples I'm going to give today. So all the way on the left side, you have your A motivation. All the way on the right side, you have intrinsic motivation or intrinsic regulation. And so that's because you do the thing, you do the activity because you love it, right? Because it's something that provides you joy and you understand that it's something that's going to be really beneficial for you. So when we look at the motivational scale, there's steps in between, right? Because you're not going to go all the way from I hate doing this activity to I love doing this activity overnight, right? There's specific steps that you can take. And so the goal of this with self-determination theory is how do I approach getting these athletes from one sect of motivation to the next one to then improve it slightly. So in this scale of motivation as well too, it changes, and that's why you're able to actually make the difference with your athletes. It's just like benching 135, right? If you train to get to 135, then all of a sudden you stop training, you're going to slide back to the left, right? You're going to only going to be able to bench 95, but you keep training, you keep progressing, you're going to be able to bench 225 one day. And so that's why I love this theory so much, is because it gives us kind of more direct goals of what we need to improve and what areas we want to see the athletes go to next within their motivation. So all the way on the left, you have A motivated. Again, complete lack of motivation. The learner does not value what's in front of them whatsoever. They couldn't care less, right? So if somebody, I've had this before previously, somebody didn't love the weight room, said they're not coming to lift today. And that is a red flag. That should be a red flag for everybody here, that the motivation is the lowest quality possible motivation that you can have. And so for the strength coach's example itself is I'm not lifting today. I'm not even thinking about lifting today because I hate lifting, right? That'd be for your own personal lifts. And then the next step, and as you progressively go further to the right on the scale, it's higher quality motivation. So the next one is external regulation. So this is a compliance form of motivation. This says that, I know if I don't lift today, I'm going to get my scholarship taken away. So I'm going to lift today. It's external rewards or punishment. How I've seen it most of the time in my experience is avoiding punishment. So it's an avoidant style of motivation, right? You understand, okay, as an athlete, if I don't practice hard today, then coach is not going to play me later, right? So I'm trying to avoid a punishment. That's how I've seen it typically, but sometimes it's for external rewards as well too. I couldn't care less about playing basketball, but at the end of the day, I want to get a scholarship for it, so I'm going to go in and do it. Like, when you think about this level of motivation, it's just not sustainable. Imagine waking up every single day and just saying, I hate what I'm about to do, but I'm going to do it because I want to avoid this punishment or I want to see this reward. Like, at some point, you're going to quit. And so it's better than A motivation because you're just straight up not doing the activity in A motivation, but it's still a really low quality of motivation. So for the strength coach's example, specifically with your lift, is, if I don't lift today, then my colleagues will make fun of me and I'll be a weaker strength coach. So I've just got to do it. You still hate the lifting. You don't really want to do it, but at the end of the day, it's something that you kind of have to do for your job. The next step to the right is introjected regulation. So this is an ego involvement piece, right? It's internal rewards. You avoid guilt. You avoid anxiety. So, we've all been there before where we could take college classes for myself as an example, right? Like, I hated class, if we're being 100% honest. It just sucked at the end of the day. And so I would love to skip class, but I would always feel incredibly anxious or incredibly guilty about doing that. And then, the next time eventually I'd go to class the next day. And so on that day that I went to class, that would be the introjected regulation, right? I'm going to class because I know I'm going to feel super anxious about missing what the slides were today and then not knowing them for the next test that's upcoming. I still hate class. I still really don't want to go, but it's slightly better because there is a guilt factor behind me not going, right? It's different from external regulation because at the end of the day, that's an external factor that's driving you. And the introjected regulation is an internal factor. It's the internal avoidance of guilt or anxiety. And so, with the lifting example for strength coaches, I know I'll be mad at myself later today if I don't lift. So, I'm going to lift today. That's basically the essential example. And the next one is identified regulation. So, identified regulations means that this activity has a specific personal importance to you, right? You value the activity. You don't have to love it, but there is a value for the activity itself. So, this is where you'll see a lot of athletes who don't really like the weight room fall in, right? They understand that lifting is going to help them get bigger, faster, stronger, and they want to do that so they can compete more on the court. And so, if you value that activity, but you don't really love it, you'd fall in the identified regulation zone. It's not because you love the activity, but you know it'll help you if you perform the activity. So the strength coach's example itself is, I don't love lifting, but I can see how it helps me live a healthier life. And so I'm going to go lift today. It's one of my athletes. This is just a fun side note. Like the other day told me, he was like, I like being in the weight room, but I don't like lifting. Right. And that to me is like textbook example of identified regulation. He knows lifting is helping him, but he doesn't really love the lifting aspect, but he'll still go in and he'll still give it a good effort every single day that he's in. But again, that's a higher quality motivation than the ones we previously just mentioned, right? Imagine now you wake up every day and you don't hate your activity. You don't necessarily love it, but you understand there's a value behind doing it. Are you going to go in and do it every day? It's still not the highest quality motivation, but at the end of the day, like you are going to be more successful. You're going to be able to sustain higher effort levels as you go across each session. You're going to be able to understand that this value, this technique, or this specific thing that we are doing provides value to my day, so I should do it. It allows you to be more consistent with your effort every day, and that's essentially what you just see as you go across the sliding scale. And so the next one to the right would be the second highest quality motivation that you can see on the scale. And this would be integrated regulation, right? There's a congruence between you and the activity. You've been doing it for so long at this point, you do it because it's a part of who you are. It's something that is basically just a rote memorization. You understand it. It's a muscle reflex for you. You're not even going to think about not lifting today as a strength coach. You're saying, I'm going to lift today. I like lifting. It's maybe not the best part of my day, but I've been doing it for so long at this point, then I'm just going to go lift today. So that would be your integrated regulation that you're falling into. This is, again, most athletes you'll see will be anywhere from the identified regulation to the intrinsic regulation. But integrated regulation is a great point for athletes as well, too, because they know they're going to have to lift today. It's already set up in their schedule, and importance has been placed on strength and conditioning coaches. Otherwise, we would not be getting paychecks. And so at the end of the day, they know they're going to do it. They're not really thinking twice about lifting. It's not like, damn it, I have to lift today, right? It's, okay, well, we're going to go get this lift done. And so that would be the second highest quality motivation. Now, the highest quality is intrinsic regulation or intrinsic motivation. So you do it for the fun of it. You absolutely love this activity. As a strength coach, lifting is the best part of my day. It's the time where, people describe lifting as their therapy. You would be within an intrinsic regulation. It's different from integrated regulation because there is much more of the joy aspect with it. You do it for the fun of it. You do it because you love doing it, and you do it because it helps you. So this is the highest quality motivation possible. And again, just to go back to that example, if you wake up and you know you're about to do something you love every single day, you're probably not going to miss a single day, right? Versus you're in the motivation side where you don't even want to go. And so how much more sustainable is this quality of motivation? And so we're all aware of these different areas of motivation. We're all, I'm sure you can see your athletes and you can start to pick apart exactly where they may be. The reason I bring this up and why the motivation is so important is because, again, you can change what area of motivation you're in, right? We can see somebody who is in the external regulation zone of lifting, right? I'm doing it because I don't want to get cut from the team that I don't go show up to lift, right? What can you do to get them to the next step, the introjected regulation? What can you do to get them to the point where, all right, well, if they miss their lift, they know they're going to have anxiety about it if it's an optional lift today, right? So what can you do to get them that step further? And what can you do to be able to actually progress them along the scale of motivation to then the highest quality scale of motivation? Because the higher quality their motivation is, the more successful they're going to be with that activity. And so that's all strength coaches do at the end of the day. I mean, think about it. Like, all you're trying to do is convince athletes to do things regularly. All I'm trying to do is convince somebody to go from 6 hours of sleep per night to 8 hours of sleep per night. And so I can pick on this scale and have a best estimate of where they probably are based off of a couple different questions. Now, is it concrete? Am I going to be right 100% of the time? No. But I can start to see where they are in this level of motivation, and then let's improve the quality of it. Let's figure out what it's going to take to get you to that next step, and that's what's going to help you improve. So that's all we do as strength coaches, just trying to get people to improve and be more consistent with their behaviors. So why not look at this theory and why not see it as valuable? So I mentioned previously there's going to be a silly example about vegetables, right? But I myself have gone from somebody who's been amotivated to now an intrinsic motivation. And that would be with vegetables itself. So everybody's heard me mention a million times my fiance, right? She's a registered dietitian, but that's not, she's amazing in every single other aspect, right? So with her high spirit, she got me bought in on what she was trying to tell me. And at the end of the day, she was trying to tell me I need to eat more vegetables. I hated vegetables for a long time. I don't know what happened. I had a long period. I lived in Philly and ate too many cheesesteaks with fries, and I understood that that was probably, a square meal that I should really enjoy for the day. And so I wasn't eating vegetables at all. I was amotivated when it came to vegetable eating. I didn't value the vegetables. I didn't care about it. I would just completely skip it. And so my fiance saw that and said, well, you can't eat like a toddler for the rest of your life. You do have to eat vegetables, and provides important nutrients, minerals, and vitamins and such. So what am I going to do as Connor's fiance to get him to the next level, right? She started checking me on it. She would start saying things like, hey, you need to eat vegetables more, right? And so now I'm going to eat vegetables. I'm in the external regulation phase because I'm going to eat vegetables because I don't want to really hear from my fiance that I didn't eat vegetables today. So I'm doing the activity. I'm actually physically eating vegetables, but I'm doing it because I'm just being compliant with what my fiance wants. And so I've taken a step on the scale, right? And so is that gonna, if my fiance were then to leave, would I probably go back to the A motivation? I would say 100%, right? But through consistent coaching, she was able to take me to the next step, which is introjected regulation, right? So at this point, I've been checked on my vegetables so many times that it's started to become a little bit of a habit for me. And now when I eat these vegetables, if let's say she's traveling with the team and I'm home by myself, I might start to feel a little bit guilty, right? I might start to feel a little bit anxious about not eating my vegetables because I know that there's some value within the eating the vegetables. I know it's going to help me be healthier in the long run. And so I'm now within the introjected regulation phase. But again, through consistent coaching and understanding exactly where I was at, my fiance stayed on me, and all of a sudden I'm in the identified regulation phase, right? I don't love vegetables. I'm not like super excited about eating them, but I know they have value. So at the end of the day, I'm just going to do them pretty consistently. I'm going to continue to eat my vegetables. Now, my meal preps, I'm making sure that there's vegetables in every single one of them every time. Instead of just doing something like carbs, like a white rice and chicken, I'm making sure that there's green beans involved with it as well too. And so I'm now within the identified regulation phase. That probably took about 4 months. I mean, if I had to guess about how long it took for me to get to that phase. So it's not a quick process, but obviously everybody here knows you're not going to take a freshman and give them the maturity of a senior within 2 days, right? It's a continuous process. It's why you need to continue coaching. And so that's how I reached my identified regulation phase. And it took a long time to get there, but I do have value to it. So now I'm doing the activity every day, right? I'm eating vegetables every single day because I know it's going to help me. All of a sudden it's become a part of who I am, right? I now eat vegetables every single day, and I don't even really start to think twice about it. I'm not thinking about the value of it. I'm doing it because I just know it's something that is a part of me now. I know that every single one of my meals needs to be a carb, protein, and vegetable. Okay. And sometimes it's even just a protein and a vegetable. We've now flipped on what my motivation level is for the eating vegetables. So again, I'm sorry I've said the word vegetables so many times, but just stick with me. We got one more step. Okay. So the next and final step is intrinsic regulation. We do it for the fun of it. Okay. So I can say 100% now, I love vegetables. I love eating air fried Brussels sprouts. I love asparagus, right? So it's something that I enjoy. It's something where now we're out at a restaurant. You know what? I'm going to order the Brussels sprouts instead of fries. Not because I'm trying to be healthier, just because I genuinely like Brussels sprouts more now than I did for fries, right? When I was previously in the motivation phase. So this was about a year, I would say, and I'm still within the intrinsic phase. So within a year, my fiance took me through essentially every single step, and it allowed me to be healthier and allowed me to be a better eater or a better consumer. And so at the end of the day, she did her job, right? She coached me up. And so this is a dumb example, but at the end of the day, you can see exactly how people move from step to step to step. And I'm sure you can think about something that you've done in your life that you've made a positive change, and you can see and think back to different phases of that change. So if we know the phases of change, now we can start to know how to direct it with our athletes. But what do you actually do? If you know the phase, how do you actually employ certain techniques for specific things that help you get that athlete to that next level of high quality motivation? And so when you look at this theory, Ryan and DC state that there's three basic human psychological needs. And that is directly how you attack getting that athlete to that higher quality motivation is if you address these needs, if you see where somebody is a little bit lower on their motivation levels, right? Where somebody is falling apart on one of their basic psychological needs. Can we address that to then get the athlete more involved? Can we address it to allow the athlete to have more choice, right? And so if we are doing those things, that helps us move to the next level. So there's three needs. There's two that I think are valuable. Obviously, if it's a basic psychological need, it's valuable, but I don't address these nearly as much as a coach versus the third. So the first two are competency and relatedness, and the last one is autonomy. So for competency, just a quick definition, this is what they say on the website: experience of mastery and being effective in one's craft. The question is, am I good at what I do? Right? If you are better at what you do, if you think you're successful, then you're going to be a better and more consistent coach, right? If I think I'm a good coach, I'm going to be more willing to show up and give it my all that day. If my competency is low, if I feel like I'm not that good, I'm going to start to second guess a lot of things. I'm going to start to feel like I might not be the best coach, so why should people really listen to me anyway? And so this is, again, it's related to every single example you can think about in your life, right? My competency was low for vegetables because I didn't really know how I wanted to cook them or how I wanted to make them good. So I wouldn't really mess around with it. I just heat up a bag and all of a sudden I'm eating, soggy and disgusting frozen green beans instead of adding in any type of seasoning, right? My competency sucked. But addressing it and teaching me recipes and understanding how to do better got me more motivated to actually be successful with it. So how do you improve your competency? Well, actually, you know what? Let's continue on with our definitions and we'll talk about that in a second. So the next one is relatedness. The definition is feeling connected in a sense of belonging. The question is, do I belong? Am I part of a group? Right? And so this is an interesting one for strength coaches specifically, and why I like talking about relatedness in relation to strength coaches is we talk about how you are not necessarily on the sports staff. You are not a sport coach itself, right? So that immediately is going to affect your relatedness slightly. Like, the sports staff spends so much time with each other, watching film, talking about players, recruiting, evaluating, doing all these things. The more time you spend with people, the closer you're going to get with them. The more inside jokes you have, the better relationship you have as a whole. The strength coach isn't involved on a lot of those things. Right now, at a higher level, you may be, but for my specific example, like I'm not going to go and talk about recruiting for 3 hours with our coaches, right? And so my relatedness is a little bit lower in relation to them. Now, it affects people differently. For me, like I couldn't really care less because if I wanted to spend that time, then I would really need to be there for every single thing and every meeting that they would have because at that point it'd be too much for me, right? But if you're somebody who really feels like you want to belong in a group and really wants to belong, like, and everybody does at the end of the day, you're lying to yourself if you feel like you don't really want to belong or be a part of something. It's going to affect your motivation levels. Like if you feel like you're not really part of the staff, then why would you care at the end of the day, right? And so I think our coaching staff does a really good job and gets me involved in a lot of things that I like doing, and they understand my interest, and so they allow me to do those things, and that really improves my relatedness, right? But if you talk about basketball strength and conditioning specifically, sometimes you're on an island, man. Like your weight room is different. You're almost always going to have a satellite weight room outside of the main weight room, so you're not really hanging out with the strength coaches. You're not really hanging out with the sports staff as much either, too. So you're kind of in this weird area where your relatedness can be affected, and that's one of the biggest complaints I hear from other coaches, specifically within basketball. But I mean, it's applicable to all coaches as a whole. Like, do I belong? Am I part of this group? And if you don't feel like that, your motivation is going to be affected for sure. Now, we talked about athletes a lot, right? Why does it matter for athletes? I think athletes really care about autonomy the most. Okay. So the definition of autonomy is that refers to feeling one has a choice and is willingly endorsing one's behavior. The opposite experience is feeling compelled or controlled in one's behavior. And so autonomy is, at the end of the day, do I have a choice? Do I have a say in what's going on? Do my values align with the organization's values? And so this can be directly affected, almost on a daily basis, right? But the reason I think it's so big for athletes is because think about how much stuff they're told to do from the sports side. Let's start with class, right? You got to show up to class every single day. We're going to run class checks. We're going to see if you're going to class, okay? So automatically we're affecting autonomy, right? Okay, now you got to go to practice every single day. You got to go here, right? We change practice time. You're going to need to be there at that exact time that we tell you. Those things affect autonomy as well, right? As a freshman, you have the lowest autonomy possible because you're still trying to figure things out, right? And some of it's safeguards, some of it's things to make sure that you are doing the things that you need to do, but it does affect your autonomy. It does feel like you don't really have a say in your choices. And then in practice, no, you need to do this specifically, right? And then you see this transition with a lot of high school kids or people who come from different offensive styles or defensive styles is no, we don't do that here, right? We do the opposite thing, right? We do the opposite form of what you've typically done in the past few years. As a high school player, right? You don't get to, you don't have a green light anymore, right? You don't get to shoot whenever you want. Maybe you were trusted at your old school, but here now we need to earn that trust. And so we're constantly telling these athletes what to do. If you give them just 1 ounce of choice, just one little nugget of like, man, here you go. What do you want to listen to for music today? You will watch the athletes just absolutely buy into what you're trying to do. So to me, autonomy is the highest effectiveness and the highest occurrence of what we actually do as coaches. So again, let's go through these again. Let's talk about how you actually affect them. So for competency, right? Can you support competency by giving the athletes appropriately difficult challenges, right? And so it's a silly example, but if somebody comes in and I know they can't bench press more than 225 and I load up 315 on the bar, that guy's going to think he sucks at lifting because I, as an authority figure, came in and said, you should be able to do this, even though I know for a fact he couldn't do it, right? And so now he thinks he sucks. His competency level is low. He couldn't care less about the weight room. He's not buying it, right? How do I support it? Let's do it on the flip side, right? If I know for a fact that he can get 230 on bench press today, he's a little bit unsure of it, right? That uncertainty is actually really beneficial to us as coaches because we get to tell them, hey, man, I know for a fact you can do this. And this is the favorite part of everybody's job when somebody gets a new PR and they get super excited and they love seeing themselves progress. And so this is your competency level, is you are directly affecting the athlete's competency by giving them something that's appropriately difficult and they're still able to succeed. Athletes like winning. I like succeeding. I think most people listening to this podcast can agree on that one too. And so can you give something that's challenging? Because I like getting challenged too, but the athletes are going to be successful so they feel like that they don't necessarily suck at that activity. Now, do they have to be successful every single time? No, right? But do you want to set people up with higher levels of success if they're on a lower quality of motivation? Yes. Right. So now let's say we are all the way back in introjected regulation, right? You want to bench press 225 just because you don't want to feel like you're a weakling. Let's say you finally fail at you fail at 225 over and over again, right? You have a risk of having that athlete go back down to external regulation or lower quality motivation. But let's say, okay, I've got 1 pound plates or 0.5 pound plates, so we can help you out today. All of a sudden you're bench pressing 221, but you're successful. And then let's go 222. And in my head, I'm thinking as a coach, like, man, I think he can get 225, but this guy's not as bought in as I want him to be. So let's make the next jump, right? Or let's just go another pound. Let's make it easier for him so I know that he'll be successful. So throwing out more wins, right? And you guys all know this. Like you as coaches and anybody who's listening, you know this. You know that if somebody's not super motivated, you want to give them a lot of wins at first. And then they can fail later. And that failure will probably motivate them to do even better if they're in a good spot. But if they're not in a good spot, there's red flags and you're concerned about it. So that is basically the main way that you can affect competency is understanding what motivation level the athlete actually has. And then, okay, can I throw them a lot of successes, things that are actually difficult, but I know for a fact they can succeed and then get them more bought in, right? And then encouraging their sense of initiation, right? Encouraging the athletes to do better. And, one of the big things that people kind of just miss a lot of the time with competency too is tell the athlete that they're good at what they're doing because you are an outside figure validating feelings that they may have, right? And so if I see something good with somebody who's a low motivation level, I'll pull them aside and I'll say, hey, man, your bench press looked killer today. I absolutely loved it, right? This is things that we do as coaches specifically, but when you know the theory, you know exactly how to apply it a little bit better. You become more surgical with how you approach things or the compliments you give out or the conversations you have with your athletes. So understanding this theory is valuable. And so competency, at the end of the day, people want to feel good at what they're doing. So don't be afraid to compliment them. Okay. Now, relatedness. And I've brought up this example before, if you've been listening, but the biggest example of anti-relatedness, which is feeling connected in a sense of belonging, would be a time where we had an athlete who was Muslim. Before the game, we got around in one giant prayer circle. And due to her religion, she did not feel it would be respectful for her to be within the circle, right? And so all of a sudden, we are in one giant circle holding hands, and we have one athlete that's on the outside of the circle. I'll give you $100 if you can guess who transferred at the end of the year. Her relatedness was directly affected. And it was a physical example, not even just my feelings. She is standing outside of a circle, and now every single other person is praying to a religion that she does not believe in. You're gone. Of course you're leaving, right? And it's the same thing with strength coaches too, right? If I don't feel like I'm part of the group, if I feel like the coaches don't value what I'm trying to bring, I'm not going to be invested in bringing it, right? And so at the end of the day, you need to show interest in people, care about them, right? And so that's like the small things. But again, if we know that this is a actual pillar of this theory, can we check it every day? Can we look at, okay, did I actually show this person that I'm interested in them? Did I ask them about their brother, right? We had an athlete who has family in Florida with just the recent Hurricane Milton. How's your family doing? Are they okay? Do they need anything? Is there anything that I can do to help out, right? Those are small conversations. It's kind of just being a good person. But at the end of the day, if you want to be a better coach, you need to make sure you're doing these things. And like we talked about with my previous mentors, the relationship development aspect is so huge. This is the key for relationship development, is approaching your relatedness and being empathetic in your responses to them, right? There's times where athletes will come up to me and say, hey man, I'm a little bit sore and it's off season, day 3, week 2. I'm going to be like, I'm sorry you're sore, but I don't really care, right? But how you approach that conversation completely changes how the athlete walks away from it, right? It's like, okay, well, he comes up to me and says he's sore. Well, yeah, I understand that completely, man. Like, I get it. It sucks being sore. But at the end of the day, it's okay to be sore right now. I want to make sure that we can continue to improve and the soreness is going to get better versus, yeah, who cares, man? Get back to the lifting, right? And so, again, I can't emphasize this enough. This is what good coaches already do, but understanding and looking at it and evaluating your conversations, keeping a journal at the end of the day, like, was I attacking relatedness today? Did I help that person feel like they were part of the group? Did I help their competency levels today? Did I give them a compliment, right? All these positive things, if you can track them, you can see athletes become more motivated. So now we get to autonomy, which again is the biggest piece that you as a strength coach can provide for your athletes. And so autonomy is, can you give the athlete a choice? And so there was a research study. I'm sure I've talked about it before on the podcast. I like talking about it a lot. And, my apologies to Rochelle from last week because she talked about high quality research. And I'm not going to bring up super high quality research right now. But what I am going to bring up was a golf putting study. So they had completely novice golf putters come in, right? And they're going to learn how to putt for the day. One group, the control group, doesn't get to pick the color of their golf ball. The other group does. The group that picked the color of their golf ball had no other differing factors. They were more successful at learning how to putt because you gave them a choice. They're in a foreign situation. They're working with a bunch of researchers they probably haven't worked with previously, doing a brand new task that they've never done before. Give them a little bit of control. Throw them a little nugget of, here's a choice that you can make today. And all of a sudden, you're going to see that they're going to be more successful. And so they took the research a little bit further. Everybody gets the same golf ball now. But one group is going to wait in a waiting room and doesn't get to pick the color of their painting or whatever painting that their style that they're looking at. The other group gets to pick the painting that they look at. Again, because of the fact that those putters, novice putters, had a choice, they're more successful in learning how to putt. When you give people a choice, they feel like their opinion matters. Their opinion is valued. And again, how many times do we tell athletes that their opinion really doesn't matter on a lot of things? So when you have the opportunity to give them a choice, you should 100% of the time do it. And so the biggest one is music. Like, if I had it my way, it'd be Motley Crue, AC/DC, and Metallica on the entire day. But I'm not the one lifting. I'm not the one who has to go through and endure this lifting session, right? So why not ask the athletes, hey, man, what do you want to listen to today, right? It's a stupid, small, silly example, but if you allow the athletes on every single day to choose their music, you'll notice a difference in the weight room. I mean, almost automatically, right? And I let players come up to me, and some coaches may not love this. If they request a song in the middle of the lift, I'll put that song on for them, right? Because all of a sudden, if that athlete's got their song on, man, CA or whatever they call me, valued my opinion in that one. Let me value his opinion a little bit on this, right? And work just a little bit harder. And they may not be thinking that in their head. Nobody typically goes to that thought process, but it does occur to them. And all of a sudden they're performing better. And isn't that what we want at the end of the day as strength coaches? Is better performance and more consistent performance. And that's what we're doing, right? And so on the website it says, supported by attempting to grasp and understand an individual's wishes, providing rationale for behavior, refraining from trying to control them. So my GA just had a perfect example of this, right? A player comes up, says, I don't feel like I'm in good enough shape. It's October 15th right now, asking to do extra conditioning. she has the highest loads continuously on Connexon. Instead of my GA just saying, nope, you're not going to do extra conditioning, right? He said, well, I have concerns about that. Showed her the Connexon data, showed her exactly how far she's been running, what her total load is. And she left that conversation feeling much more valued and feeling like her opinion at least mattered. Like it wasn't just, no, we're not going to do conditioning because I don't want to do it, or no, because it's not going to help you, right? He broke it down for her, explained to her the process of why he thinks it's not going to be valuable for her, and still gave her a choice with some other things to do at the end, right? But within a lifting example itself too, right? Like I don't really care if you're doing hammer curls or seated wide grip, dumbbell bicep curls. It doesn't matter to me, man. Like, yeah, maybe we're hitting a different angle. And if I was training Chris Bumstead, then we'd be talking a little bit differently, right? But at the end of the day, if an athlete loves barbell curls and hates dumbbell curls, let them do barbell curls. You're going to get a better result from the athlete just because you gave them that small choice. And so it's okay to give over to the athlete a little bit of autonomy, a little bit of freedom, especially within the weight room, which is going to be a lower motivation level, right? So like an athlete who's on the basketball court is maybe in the identified or intrinsic regulation, right? They love it. They know it's important. They know they want to do these things, right? Or sorry, integrated or intrinsic motivation. It's part of who they are. So on the court, they're going to be willing to put up with a lot more, right? But in the weight room, maybe they're in a much lower external regulation or introjected regulation part of the scale. So now they're going to say to themselves, well, I should be more diligent within the weight room because I'm getting a little bit of a choice in this, right? So that's why autonomy is so important within the weight room, and maybe not on the court as much, as because athletes probably are going to love basketball or love their sport more than they're going to love the weight room, and that's okay. So what as coaches can we do to support them, to get them to love the weight room, to get them to buy into it, right? And like to me, the number one success stories are former athletes who become strength coaches. Like that's like the creme de la creme of convincing athletes that the weight room is important. And so they do it because they love it. And also they chose it as their career point now too. And so just some more small examples of autonomy, right, is something that Matt Aldridge spoke about previously, right, is when he gets to his conference championship time, his programming is a lot less set on what he wants to do and a lot more set around what the athletes want to do. And so he gave the athletes the choice of, well, what do you want to do? Do you want to do our pin squats? Do you want to do our full range of motion squats, right? And obviously Furman basketball, where he was at previously, had a high level of success in the postseason. Again, you can't attribute it to just this, but allowing the athlete that choice does provide a higher quality and higher consistency of a high quality motivation level. And so giving the athletes the choice is okay. I just want to make sure everybody's clear on that. Is it's okay to do that, and it's probably going to be better than okay. It's going to be beneficial to your program. So don't be afraid to give them their choice, right? And so how do I, as a coach, directly do these things? At this point, it's kind of rote memorization for me. I've been doing it for long enough to be able to understand this exact theory. But when I first started out, I would literally keep a journal of like, did I support autonomy today? What was my thing today in the lift that allowed the athletes a choice? Most of the time, it's going to be the music, right? But then on the other days, when I know it's a day, if we're lifting, for example, right now we're lifting 4 days per week in season, and I'm more of a total body. I like lifting heavy, kind of strength coach. And so my fourth day is more, I call it what you feel lift. Listen to your body lifts, right? Give me the weight that you think you can do today, because how valuable is that fourth lift for me going to be? Not really, because I care about those first 3 days. So on the fourth lift, why not give the athlete a little bit more choice? Throw them a little bit extra rope, and you'll watch them be much happier with the other 3 days where I'm asking them to do a lot of things that I specifically want them to do. And so when you support the autonomy, when you support the competency, when you support the relatedness, you will see the athletes move along the scale of motivation. Now, are you going to get everybody to love the weight room? No. But if you get somebody from avoiding, the avoidant style of motivation of, I'm going to do this because I don't want to get punished, to all of a sudden it's just part of who they are, they're going to be more consistent. They're going to be better about it. And it's the 23-hour rule, right, that all strength coaches talk about. Outside of this hour that I have you for the lift today, you're making choices for 23 other hours. What are your choices going to be? So can you get the athlete to a higher level of motivation so that they go to bed just a little bit earlier, maybe 30 minutes earlier? We all know it's going to help, right? Do they take their multivitamin today? Do I not have to remind them about these things? Because can we help the athletes be successful on their own? And this is a direct theory that I think supports it. So again, what did I do in the beginning? I would look and evaluate. Did I support competency? Did I support relatedness? Did I support autonomy? And what I noticed is when I focus specifically on one player, and if I was able to track more areas of things that I've done to help support them, that player was more motivated within the weight room, almost 100% of the time. Some players, you're just not going to be able to get to love the weight room, right? It's happened before. We've all had kind of what you would call the bad eggs or whatever, right? But when we look at what's applicable to most athletes, this theory is really, really beneficial. And again, I'm not a CNPC. I'm not somebody who's going to charge you to talk about this. But if you have questions, I encourage you to reach out. I encourage you to look up more of Ryan in DC. And then Majot, I believe, was the one who translated to sport theory itself. And I might have made my professor, Rebecca Zakryshik, very happy with remembering that, right? There's a ton of resources out in self-determination theory, and there's a ton of different examples of how to use it. But at the end of the day, just understand those three basic human psychological needs. Evaluate your athletes. Look at, is their relatedness low? And so if it is, what can I do to support relatedness for that athlete on that specific day? Is autonomy low? What can I do to support autonomy on that specific day, right? Just picking these things apart, it'll completely change your coaching overnight. And so do you have to have autonomy all the time? No. Do you have to, in the middle of a game, am I worried about competency, right? Maybe if a player's not shooting super well. But at the end of the day, I'm not going to go up to him and say, hey, man, you got this. You're great, right? Like the players typically don't love that type of stuff. So is there a time and place for this? Yes, for sure. But at the end of the day, it helps. It makes your coaching better. It's a higher quality higher quality of coaching as a whole. And that's all we're looking for as strength coaches. So again, why I love this theory so much is it helps give you a step-by-step example of how to look at these things and how to change them and how to evaluate them. I'm more than happy to talk about it with anybody who wants to reach out. I really think that coaches should look into this just a little bit more and understand how it can be beneficial for your athletes and for your coaching itself. And also understanding like how you do approach things yourself too, right? Like, am I in an interjected regulation phase right now with my motivation, right? How do I improve those things? How do I get better at those things? So the psychology piece is always super interesting to me, and I think it's a great way to break it down. So again, as strength coaches, at the end of the day, all we're trying to do is get our athletes to be higher quality motivation and a higher consistency of their motivation, and this is a great way to do it. So if you've made it all the way to the end of this podcast with me, 43 minutes and 42 seconds post intro, thank you for listening. I appreciate you greatly. And once again, I just want to emphasize how awesome it is for me to do this podcast. Like, it's so much fun. And then the community that's developed from it and the people who checked in on me, that was another perspective check for myself as well too, right? Like, man, people care. Like, and it's awesome to be a part of a community. Relatedness, just saying, okay? And so it's very fun for me to do this. I appreciate you guys listening, especially if you're able to listen to me yammer for 45 minutes straight. I appreciate that because only my fiance has been able to put up with it so far. And so you deserve a medal, and I appreciate you. But thank you to all of you who listen. Thank you to Samson for allowing me the opportunity to do this podcast. It's so much fun, and I can't wait to continue going on. Thanks for listening.